Hey everyone, Steven here and welcome to You Are Admirable. In this short episode, I want to share a life-altering lesson I learned about 2 years ago that has immensely contributed to the birth of this project. It's a lesson about humility. And I want to start out by asking what it means to you to be humble. For me, I always thought of humility as never answering yes to the question of, are you good at this? So when people ask me if I was a good soccer player, a good French horn player, a good student, my answer was always, yes, I am. Internally, that was my answer because I was good at those things. And I thought as long as I didn't say I was good at those, that made me a humble person. I now know that that is a form of humility, and it's called outward humility. I learned that term from an online program I bought that had many different life lessons, including this one on humility, which was a foundational lesson of the program and also one of the very first lessons I ever got on the subject of humility. So from my computer, I learned about outward humility and also about genuine humility. To illustrate the difference, the example was Michael Jordan, who just so happens to be one of my childhood idols. From an outsider's perspective, MJ is one of the cockiest, most arrogant people you can find. He was always talking smack. There's some really great stories, one of which involves him during a game counting down from 40 to his opponent as he was scoring points. He had decided before the game that he was going to score at least 40 points on this guy, so throughout the game, counted down from 40 to 0 as he scored. And I'm sure that's not the only example of something like that he did. He's also the one credited with the quote, "There's no I in team, but there is in win." Now, if anybody had the right to be cocky, it was him because he always followed through on what he said, and he was the best. And he was the best because although he wasn't outwardly humble, he was genuinely humble. He listened to his coaches. Dean Smith, his college coach, said Michael was one of the very best at listening closely to what the coaches had to say and then implementing it. Phil Jackson, one of his coaches at the Bulls, once asked Michael to cut down on what he was doing and not be the scoring leader. And Michael, somewhat reluctantly I can imagine, agreed to cut back on his scoring average. Arguably the best basketball player of all time, he was still willing to listen and learn and improve. That is genuine humility. I'm curious, do you think that humility is measurable? That it is quantifiable? That it has a system of measurement other than just a gut feeling about someone? Well, the idea that it is measurable was a part of this online lesson I learned and a completely new concept to me. The lesson purported that humility can be measured in 4 ways. How many books do you read? How many mentors do you have? How often do you copy or steal ideas? And how much money are you spending on your self-improvement? The notion that humility can be measured was kind of cool, and also very depressing. You see, I determined at a very young age that I was a bad reader, a slow reader, and that reading wasn't the best use of my time. So I read 0 books. At the same point, I thought that anything I wanted to learn, I could get from the internet. I had 0 mentors. I can remember many a time where I thought I had a better way of doing something than the traditional, successful methods. I never copied or stole ideas. And lastly, I thought of myself as frugal, but I'll admit it now, I was borderline cheap. One of those people who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. I spent no money on my self-improvement. Those 4 measurements, books, mentors, copying and stealing ideas, and spending money on self-improvement, all pretty much translate to, am I standing on the shoulders of the successful giants before me? Or do I think that I have or can find all of the answers on my own without any sacrifice or effort? I also want to add a 5th measurement of humility. Now, I think this 5th measurement should naturally result from a high score on the first 4, but it's also worthwhile to treat it independently. There have been some studies in the scientific realm which have led to a humility helpfulness hypothesis. Basically, the findings are that humble people are the most likely to help their peers even when there's no social pressure to do so. So the fifth measure of humility I would propose is how often do you help others without expecting anything in return? Now this can include anything from random acts of kindness, like helping your neighbor take the trash out, to partnering with nonprofit organizations and helping out in whatever capacity they need. The difference between outward humility and this fifth measurement of humility is well summed up by a quote by Rick Warren. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. That's worth repeating. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. Knowing I had a severe deficiency in these measurements of humility, I knew I wanted to make some changes. I've read more books in the last 2 years than the rest of my life. The idea to do this podcast and video interviews is not new. I stole the idea, and I'm copying models that work. I've also spent a lot of time and money on my self-improvement. Buying books, buying a gym membership, and actually going, that's an important part of that. Buying workshops and paying membership dues to be in clubs that are helping with my professional improvement. And then all the money and time that I've spent on this project are all examples of me spending more on self-improvement. I agree to help people whenever the opportunity presents itself, and I've sought out volunteer opportunities with local nonprofits. And lastly, along with some long-term mentors I've added, I now get a new mentor almost every week through You Are Admirable. I feel like I've really embraced that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, "Every man I meet is my superior in some way." And in that, I learn from him. I've even learned a new lesson about humility from my fifth interviewee, Todd Hobrecht. He said, "Humility is being honest about who you are. Don't be bigger, don't be smaller, just be honest." I want to end with the definition of humility. Humility is the quality of being humble, defined as having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance. Outward humility is the showing part of that definition. Genuine humility is the having part of that definition, and it's measurable. Read books, seek mentors, copy and steal ideas, spend money on your self-improvement, help others. And remember, you are admirable. We'll see you next time.